many people that are working together to move the ball forward. And so now we're going to start our panel of consumers, and I'm going to introduce our moderator, who is Marcus Soutra. Marcus, I've known him longer than he'd like me to have known him, is the co-founder and president of Eye to Eye, which is a national nonprofit organization run by and for the neurodiverse community. The organization works to ensure all neurodiverse young people feel seen, heard, and valued, and are joined in the neurodiverse community. He's a driving force for change, working every day to create a more equitable world for people who learn differently. And I will say one of the things that for you young people who are here, because you're young now, but you won't be young forever, right? When he was in college, he and a couple of buddies all were neurodiverse, and they started this national organization as college kids changing the world. They've made a huge impact. You will hear more from Marcus now. I'm going to ask him to join us as the panelist, and then our panel members. Are you going to introduce the panel members? Sammi, who's here from Eye to Eye. She's an Eye to Eye ambassador. Come on up. Assemblymember Khaleel Anderson is a panelist who will be coming up. Who's our other panelist? Oh, thank you. Thank you. Dr., they didn't give me the... We have another panelist who is a mom of 4 children who are neurodiverse, and she's going to be speaking. Thank you so much. Dr. Canton, I'm so sorry, brain lapse. Thank you very much.
One more round of applause for Joanne. Thank you so much. Thank you for everybody for being here today. This is just wonderful to have a turnout like this. And I just want to call out how impressive it is and how wonderful it is to have so many people sharing their stories today. I think that's a real sign of the evolution of this issue, is that you have people who are now in places of power, who grew up with these identities, who grew up as members of the neurodiverse community, who grew up dyslexic and are now willing to share their story and break the stigma. So today is such an important issue, it's an important day because it sheds a light on an issue that affects every family. I think all of us in this room are either a member who's dyslexic or neurodiverse, or someone in their family is. It's one of those issues that every time you start talking about it, someone says, oh, that's my nephew, that's my cousin, that's me, that's my son. And so I think the more and more we keep having these conversations and sharing our stories, the more people come into the community. If we're going to talk about equity, if we're going to talk about the school-to-prison pipeline, if we're going to talk about creating an equitable education system, we need to be talking about the issue of dyslexia and neurodiversity, because otherwise you cannot solve those issues without addressing this. First, I think we must address the stigma that exists for people who learn differently. So many people who are neurodiverse don't ever get the identification, don't ever get the label because of the stigma. I often refer to my label as a luxury, and it should not be. The label should not be a luxury, be something that everyone is afforded so that they can get the education that they deserve. Second, we need to make sure students have high-quality literacy. Yes, of course. Every teacher needs to be trained in the general education classroom around what it means to have a learning difference. We also need to have high-quality social emotional programs for students so that they can advocate for themselves when they go from elementary, middle to high school, and beyond into their careers. Because being able to advocate for yourself is something that is key to no matter what environment you're in, whether it's a learning environment or work environment, that's a skill you need to carry with you for the rest of your life. So today we're going to hear from some incredible leaders in the neurodiverse community. I'm proud to say that everyone on this panel is neurodiverse, carries a label of ADHD, dyslexia, and identifies as part of this community, which is a really, really amazing thing. I believe that representation is incredibly important. And that's one of the things I'm most proud of with this event today is the representation of people who learn differently sharing their stories. So I've got a few questions for each of our panelists here. We'll go down the line. But before we dive into really the meat of the topic, I was wondering if you could just introduce yourself. You guys have all incredibly impressive resumes. If you could share a little bit about yourself and what brought you here today.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Dr. Sinayi Canton. That's why she was struggling to say it. It could be a little challenging. Something I've experienced since a kid. I am a person with ADHD, and I'm the mother of 6 African-American sons, 4 of whom have different developmental variations, 3 with dyslexia, and one with ADHD. And that's how I got into this, I guess, social justice issue for me, because I think reading is a human right. And so if you can't read, you can't travel, you can't work, you can't do anything. And so for me, I had my first son at 16, and at the age of 7, he was diagnosed with dyslexia and anxiety. And it was at that point I had to start a fight to figure out how would I educate this kid. And like many in this room, trying to work within a system that was not very friendly to children with developmental variations, I learned a lot. And so over the last 25 years, I have assisted families in my community with impartial hearings, IEP meetings, because like myself, we didn't have affluence or finances to pay for a lawyer or neuropsychological evaluation. So we had to fight within the system to get those things, and it's not always easy. And so I have spent the last 7 years in my community working alongside other parent leaders and community leaders around making dyslexia a normal part of our school curriculum, making the services that kids need, whether it's a neuropsychological evaluation a child needs, or the Gillihan tutoring that a child may need, or support services, because what people don't often talk about is the trauma that happens for a student. It's great that I'll get to learn how to read, but no one ever deals with the emotional distress that I experienced the 3 or 4 years being in a classroom unable to read, watching my peers move along, scared that I'm going to be left back, and all the anxiety that goes with dyslexia. And I think for me, that's how I got to this. And so in the city, I support parents, have a support group. As a mother, how do I support a child with dyslexia? What does that mean? And so for me, I think it's more than just us getting good academic programs. It is looking at the totality of how this particular developmental variation affects the mind, the spirit, and the whole individual.
That was incredibly well said. I just want to double click on the point around intersectionality. If we're going to have this conversation, we've got to be talking about race, poverty, and disability. And it's those intersecting things that are so key to really understanding what's going on. Khaleel, if you can introduce yourself.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mr. Marcus. Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, everyone. It is still morning. I'm rushing the day, but it's good to see everyone. My name is Khaleel Anderson, and I proudly serve the 31st Assembly District. Never been told I was too quiet, but I serve the 31st Assembly District in South Queens, which includes the neighborhoods of Rosedale, Springfield Gardens, South Ozone Park, and the Rockaway Peninsula, where I've called home for over 15 years. And I'm here today on the panel to really talk about my journey, but also zoom in on how my journey is the collective journey of many young people of color who go through the public school system undiagnosed and unsupported. And when I talk about my journey being a District 75 student with an IEP, with set services from kindergarten to 12th grade, I talk about the various bumps along that journey where set services and early intervention and even at-home intervention for my diagnosed disability, which was and is emotional disturbance and ADHD, the intersection between how folks and individuals were able to get resources and services, which schools had resources and services, and how many folks had to go outside of the community to get those resources and services. I say that to say that my story is not unique in that there are many black children, many brown children that are often have labels placed on them with emotional disturbance, with ADHD, without the services coming. And oftentimes there could be a misdiagnosis where it could be dyslexia, it could be a learning disability that's not intervened in on early. And I really want to hammer that point home today as I'm on the panel. And I want to thank my colleagues, Assemblywoman Simon and Assemblymember Carroll, for championing this issue in the Assembly, because it's really important that we take heed and notice to it. If I want to read some stats to you guys, when we look at some data here, it says in New York City, black children are 2 times more likely to be identified in the category of emotional disturbance than white children. And that's a reading by Frenskow in 2021. There's also some data that says individuals with unaddressed dyslexia have an increase of mental health issues related to anxiety and depression, and Dr. Canton so graciously mentioned that in her opening remarks. So there's an intersection, and Mr. Marcus also mentioned there's an intersection between race, access, resources, and the medical field consistently misdiagnosing individuals. At the time, my mom was raising 3 young children, young boys, babies, and I was one of them, my other 2 brothers. And where the intersection that I'm speaking about comes into play is how people get access to resources. Whereas the resources that I needed for set services, OT, speech, all those services that I needed in second grade, first and second and third grade, those services I had to now travel for, or sometimes have in-home services for that might not be covered, and so we only could see them once a month or reduced. Those are the things and the issues that we're looking to work to resolve in the Assembly. My lived experience is not unique in that so many young children go through this, and so I really hope that today's panel that we'll be able to touch more on that and to just be able to generate some solutions towards ideas and continue to push those. So I thank you all for participating. I'm looking forward for a really, really engaging conversation from the audience.
Hi, I'm Sammy. I'm a junior at a school in Lower Manhattan called LREI. I also am the chapter leader of Eye to Eye that's in my school, which Marcus briefly talked about. I'm really here to inspire young people to share their stories, to destigmatize the label, and to fight for awareness. I got my first neuropsych at a younger age than most in second grade, but they diagnosed me with a reading disorder, and that made it really difficult for me to understand what my struggles really were. No one really knew what was going on besides the fact that I wasn't too great at reading. And so then in sixth grade, 4 years later, I got a new neuropsych, and I was finally granted the label of dyslexia. Despite the stigma surrounding the label, for me, I found it gave me a shared experience with others around me. It finally allowed me the accommodations that evened out the playing field. And most importantly, it explained why school felt so difficult for me. I was fortunate enough to go to an extremely small private school to get individual attention. They allowed us to bring in a tutor. A lot of people aren't gifted those privileges, and that's what I'm really here today, to inspire others to share their stories, to hopefully lead to destigmatizing the label.
Thank you, Sammy. I know we don't have a lot of time, so hopefully get 1 or 2 questions to each of you. Dr. Canton, I'll start with you. You're an advocate, you're a leader, you organize parents. I was wondering, there's a lot of parents in the audience today who've advocated for their children, and you've done it with so many. And I'm just curious, we were riding on the bus up here today talking about this. If you could kind of share with me, as a mother of 4 neurodiverse children, what do you think New York should be prioritizing in terms of supporting families right now?
I think in New York City, a couple of things. One of the things that really needs to be at the top of this whole campaign or this whole drive to bring dyslexia to the awareness and begin to infuse it within our public education system that I've not yet heard is the support, the emotional and mental support that families need just to understand how to support that child. You know, I have a preschool and wellness center in Harlem, and in the fall I started a support group for parents just to have a space to talk about the struggles of watching their child struggle with reading or struggling through the services or just finding ways to support one another on that journey to getting what they need. That's one of the things the public school system needs to do. The second thing that our New York City or our education system need to do, I just graduated from Bank Street College with a dual master's in special education and general education. And my classmates, a large majority of them, what I love about Bank Street, had classes that really talk specifically about whether it be dyslexia or other learning, reading, literacy disabilities, but teaching teachers how to support those kids, right? A lot of our city and CUNY universities do not do that. And so if you're going to decide to teach children, you need to understand that you're going to get kids in your class who need to learn different. And it's not fair that they need to be ushered out into a different labeling or different setting just to get a regular education. And so I think CUNY and our education programs around New York State at these colleges need to make it mandatory that teachers not learn about what we label as a group disability or special ed, because a child with autism needs something very different from a child with ADHD or dyslexia. And teachers need to know the difference, and maybe there needs to be incentive to specialize, right? Instead of us having to always fight to find a school in a private setting to do that. And so those are issues that our elected officials, as well as our education leaders, as well as those who run these universities, need to think about. There needs to be a think tank on how we're going to think about what we call special education in New York City or New York State, and then begin to specialize within teachers, because you send teachers to college, they do all this training, and then once they get into the school, you now have to retrain them to support these kids, which I think is absurd. So for me, those two big issues, supporting parents and supporting our teachers and getting the skill to support the kids, because none of this is going to work if we just keep getting these large companies to create curriculums who are very detached from the day-to-day issues that our children and families and educators face in trying to read.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Canton, for setting the stage for what we should be working on as legislators. And I want to add on that my lived experience has been being someone who has had an IEP, and my set services required therapy and required support services with one-on-one paraprofessionals. And when I transferred from the New York City public school system into the CUNY system, there was no transition that existed that said, hey, you have an IEP, you can take that over to this department, and the services, including extra time on tests and exams and things of that nature, will be transferred over. And the rule that currently stands within CUNY, I'm not sure if it's a law or a rule, it says you have a year before you come in. You have to do it by your freshman year, or all of your extra support services that you got with your IEP in the school system will be non-existent or not honored. And so, of course, I didn't know that. And so I went along through college not knowing that I could have had extra time if my guidance counselor or my social worker or someone in high school or someone in the public high school system or someone in the CUNY system would have said, you're entitled to this. And so there has to be a mandatory notification process, and my office is working on legislation to figure out how to marry the two and make that connection, because there's different systems for public universities and private universities and state universities that are also public in that regard. So we're trying to work on that legislation because it would really help be able to carry those important set services over to college so that those students can be their best and most successful selves. A lot of our students do not operate well under pressure, under anxiety, under the unknown. And so if we can remove that one barrier to allow them to be able to take exams and tests and whatever set services that the college obviously can translate and provide, that's pertinent and that's important. And so we should be making those changes, and they should be automatic. Correct. What are we hiding here? Are we saying that these students are not entitled to these services? Are we saying that there are limited services and that we need more resources into the colleges to make sure that they can provide these services? What are we hiding? Why are we saying that this shouldn't be or this isn't automatic? So that's important. I just wanted to piggyback off of that point. But you had a question.
Well, I think you actually already answered it twice over, so it was amazing. So, and I completely agree. I mean, the idea that, like, as somebody who's professionally dyslexic, that I would have to go back to get diagnosed again if I were wanting to go to graduate school is one of the most absurd things in the world and prevents so many people from accessing their education. And we were talking about this a lot on the bus ride up, and talking about the fight to get accommodations. I started off my career as an educator, as a teacher, and I could not get accommodations on the teacher's test to become a teacher to support students with learning disabilities because my dyslexia had expired, as they told me. So, so I think, like, from a legal standpoint, believe me, ask my wife, it's not expired. So Sammi, you are in the trenches, so to speak, right now in school. So, and there are a lot of young people in this audience. You're a mentor in Eye to Eye. You share your story a lot. I was wondering if you could give this next generation, the younger students in the audience, just a little bit of advice as you as a mentor, and if you can have a mentor moment with our kids today.
Yeah, of course. I would say the biggest piece of advice I could give young people is to advocate for yourself. No one really knows how your mind works, especially as neurodiverse people, better than you. And for me, I found that although advocacy was very difficult, especially at a young age, going up to teachers telling them, hey, I can't really read aloud, it'll really stress me out, or that I need audiobooks for the assigned articles you give me. It can be difficult telling that to someone of authority, but again, advocating for yourself and sticking up for yourself is what's gonna make you be able to thrive in school. And without that, then because of how the system is set up right now, it's really difficult. So I would say advocacy is key.
What was the biggest factor in you being able to learn how to advocate for yourself? Because that can be a very daunting thing for so many people, especially when there's so much stigma. I know when I used to tell people I had learning disability, I used to get this kind of sympathetic head tilt of like, ah, and then I was like, okay, I'm not going to talk about that anymore. So like, what gave you the self-confidence and the ability to advocate for yourself?
I would say, honestly, for my experiences was a lot of just like trial and error. Like, I learned that if I didn't tell teachers what I needed, then I wouldn't get what I needed. It shouldn't be that way. No one should have to learn how to advocate for yourself in that way. But for me, it was really just trial and error. But I think also, for me, I got my second neuropsych from a really great psychologist, and he gave specific strategies I could use in school, saying, tell your teachers this, tell your teachers that, you need to make sure to take really thorough notes to look over. And that's what really helped me in learning how to advocate for myself. Hopefully in the future, if we can teach teachers to teach kids with learning differences or who are neurodivergent, then those kids at a young age won't have to learn to advocate for themselves, which can be really difficult. And it gets easier with time, though. So.
Awesome. Great advice. Khaleel, we want to come back to you because I make sure you get a question in. You have an incredible career. You're flourishing, and I'm just curious how your neurodiversity has impacted your career as a public servant.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mr. Marcus. So it allowed, being neurodiverse, it allowed me to understand the different perspectives of students across my district and across the communities, really just being able to hear and listen, but also listen with empathy, which is important. We don't want the head tilt of sympathy. We want folks to be empathetic and be able to use whatever power or resources they have to be able to change and make an impact on that issue and that subject matter. And now we're speaking about dyslexia and learning disabilities and across the board, but also literacy disabilities. And so when I think about my career serving here in the Assembly, I'm looking at my lived experience as a microcosm, as a smaller to the larger of how many other students that might not have the strength of voice to speak up for themselves or the support systems to speak up for themselves. And so using this platform and this power to do that is sort of how I've been able to channel that and also make sure that we're delivering. I'll give one really good example of how we're trying to connect the dots where there are so many broken bridges and broken dots. In my district, I represent a really large District 75 student base. We have over 800 students just on the Rockaway Peninsula alone who are in the District 75 special education system, just on the Rockaway Peninsula. It's one part of my district. Mm-hmm. And so what we did was we have one of the largest healthcare providers in that region, which is the Episcopal Hospital System. And we said we want to connect them to the school for ongoing partnership for intervention services, for comprehensive mental health services on the PED side, because these are kids and students who are in pre-K to 8th grade. So we made that connection and that relationship, and now they've been able to send referrals out to make sure that those students have what they need on the mental health side so that they're not discouraged by any issues that they might have with reading or math or school or performance or behavioral issues, like some of the things that I struggled through. So a student that has ADHD or is diagnosed with emotional disturbance, both of which I had been and have been and continue to be, need to be able to have those services readily available, so that that also empowers the parents to be able to know, well, my school will be able to assist me in this because now that partnership exists. And so the partnership is 2 months in, and we're still testing it to see what the benefits are and how it can help, because in set services, oftentimes, there is a recommendation or there is a requirement for outpatient services and therapy outside, separate from the school. But if the wait lists are a mile long, and if the services are not culturally responsive or close or near, and there's additional barriers placed on them, the kids will not go through it, and the kids won't have it, and then that goes one more thing that stands in the way for them being able to learn at their best self. So this relationship with the Episcopal Hospital System and our District 75 schools on the Rockaway Peninsula will be able to help, but we have so much more to do in the other neighboring school districts that I represent in Rosedale and Springfield Gardens and South Ozone Park. And this, again, I always look at this as a microcosm. If we can get this right on the local level, we can emulate it across the borough, across the city, across the state, and so on. But that relationship with our local healthcare providers who understand that intervention is important and are aligned in that thinking can be able to do wonders for communities that otherwise do not have those services, resources, and supports.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, I think it's well said, yes. It's always important at events like this that we focus on some of the bright spots and what is actually working, because we know there are lots of things happening in really great places and need to be able to figure out ways in which to scale those interventions across to other schools and other communities. So I think I'm about to get the hook, right, in like a minute or two? No? Okay, cool. So Dr. Canton, I wanted to know, what are some other bright spots you've seen, or what have you seen that's worked? Maybe it's working for only a few students and needs to be scaled to other places, but in this effort to focus on the positive for a minute.
So I'm in Harlem in District 5, and so one of the things in working with our mayor and our chancellor, at my son's school, we had brought the dyslexic program that is supposed to support the lower grades, and I'm a person who collects data. I create programs, but I always think about the assessment. Is this program working? And so in my son's school, I have spoken with our preschool teachers, our first grade, second grade, kindergarten teachers who have been through the intense training to learn how to support kids with dyslexia or other literacy-based disabilities. And the teachers have said to me, this training has changed my whole ability to teach.
Wow.
And I have so many students who, not only am I able to now know what to call this thing that they're struggling with, but I now have some tools to support that student, right, at the elementary level. In the early childhood level, I'm an early childhood educator, and over the last few years, one of the things I have done in schools, preschools I've worked with, because you see so many kids coming with different neurodivergent things, a lot of times we would recommend those kids to go out to like a developmental school. But we found a shortage in our community. There are not enough schools for the kids that need to be there. But parents still need to work. So what we did in our schools was we created spaces, sensory rooms, brought trained teachers in ABA and other things to then just support the kids, because the reality was they was not leaving. They weren't going to get a placement in time enough for the school year to end for them to actually go to an environment. So while they were still with us, it's like working within what you have to support those things. And I think giving the teachers the skills to be feel equipped to support kids with different learning variations made the learning much better, whether it's in our public elementary schools or just in our early childhood environments. And so I think those two things, and then parents feeling like there's a space that they can feel safe to talk about, like, I don't know what to do with this kid. I don't know how to support this kid. It's not that I'm a bad parent, I just don't understand. And that is not always valued in our communities. If you come in the room as a parent and say, I don't know what to do, you're thought of as a bad parent, right? And the reality is I'm not a bad parent. I may just be a different learner from my student. And so creating spaces in my community where families can talk about that has been very tremendous in building advocacy and also just giving families better, healthier relationships. And I think that is some of the things that I hope will transfer into other communities and for other families, particularly families of color, where we don't really talk about special children with different diversities. It's something that we really struggle with because of the stigmas that has been placed on us for generations.
Awesome. Well said. Thank you. One of the things I think that's most powerful about events like this is a sense of community that we all feel. People are coming together and connected on this issue, and that's something that we believe strongly in at Eye to Eye. So I'm going to give the last question to Sammi. Sammi, if you could we always like to center things on student voice at Eye to Eye, and I think that's important for this event as well, and I know other people are going to get the chance to share their stories. But Sammi, if you could just speak a little bit to the role that community has played for you. I know you've built a really empowered community at your school. If you can speak a little bit about the role community plays in your success.
Yeah, definitely. So when I was in 9th grade and I was first starting at LRI, my high school, I joined a club called Same, Same, But Different, which was basically an affinity group for neurodivergent students. And for me, that was the first time I really got to be in a room like once a week just talking with other kids who had very similar experiences. Since I was in 9th grade at the time, I got to hear advice from older students, and that really helped me navigating my way through a new high school. And now that I'm a junior, I lead the club, and it's also what inspired me to bring a chapter of Eye to Eye to my school to try and give that sense of community that I didn't really get until 9th grade to give to younger students. So now at LREI, we have a chapter, and us high schoolers meet with the 4th graders at LREI to talk about learning differences and social emotional learning, and it's been a really great opportunity. And just hearing from other people who have shared experience with you, forming a community can make a really large impact, especially on the emotional well-being of children who are neurodivergent.
Thank you, Sammi. All right, well, I'm going to leave it on that note. Thank you guys all for being here. Thank you for all you're doing for your children and so many others. Can we use one more big hand for our panelists here? Cool. Thank you so much.